Mesedez. Bilbao Alhóndigaren izenean isiltzen bazarete hitz egiten hasiko gara. Ongi etorri, gabon dizuela, bienvenidos, bienvenidas a esta nueva conversación del festival Gutun Zuria de AlhóndigaBilbao, que, como sabéis, este año cumple su quinta edición, con una conversación, con una serie de conversaciones que versan sobre todo de la relación que existe entre la verdad y la mentira. De ahí el título, Secretos y mentiras. Benetan, solasaldi interesgarria entzun dugu, Iñaki kazetariaren eta Bill Keller kazetariaren artean. Orain segidan, Palahniukek Javier Calvo idazlearekin solasaldia izango du eta une batetik bestera aurkeztuko dizkizuegu. La literatura norteamericana es la invitada principal de estas quintas jornadas Gutun Zuria, cuyas sesiones, además, si no podéis asistir en persona a este auditorio de la Alhóndiga de Bilbao, podéis seguir en directo a través de Internet, aunque, lógicamente, para nosotros es un placer veros, sobre todo jugando el Athletic, tanta gente hoy aquí. BBK eta El Correo, gure babesle nagusiak ere beraiei ere eskerrona adierazi nahi diegu guztia egiten lagundu digutelako. Once again, we would like to emphasize the real pleasure it is for Bilbao Alhóndiga to have all these writers and journalists in this festival. So, first of all, thank you very much for agreeing to our invitation. La dinámica de esta sesión, de esta conversación, será muy parecida a la anterior, una hora de conversación entre los dos escritores y un último turno de 15 minutos de preguntas, de consideraciones, de reflexiones que queráis hacerles llegar. Ingelesez arituko da idazle gonbidatua eta hori guztia zuzenean jarraitzeko dagoeneko tresnak badituzue, ea orain ongi esaten dudan. Erderazkoa lehen kanala izango da, digo que la traducción simultánea será en el primer canal en castellano, en inglés en el segundo y en euskera en el tercero. Os recuerdo además que esta conversación, al ser la última del día, es un tanto especial porque cuando finalice, más o menos hacia las 10 de la noche, el propio Palahniuk mantendrá un contacto más cercano y hasta personal con todos vosotros, si es que os apetece, hacia las 10 en el hall de este auditorio, y os serviremos además un vino concretamente norteamericano de California, de la bodega Beringer Sonoma, lo cual tampoco está mal. Palahniuk is well known for the award-winning novel Fight Club, which quickly became a bestseller and was filmed also with, indeed, great success. Sus historias, que incurren en lo políticamente incorrecto, se centran en desenmascarar la falsedad de las suposiciones de una forma perversa, dicen. Palahniuk presenta en Gutun Zuria su última novela, traducida al español, Al desnudo, de la editorial Mondadori. Please join me in welcoming Javier Calvo and Palahniuk.
You need to put on your headphones. De acuerdo, buenas noches. Es para mí un honor estar aquí con Palahniuk, que es una persona que ha estado extremadamente presente en mi vida profesional de los últimos 10 años y con quien me reencuentro ahora después de 10 años precisamente. Y no he escuchado, la verdad, la presentación que han hecho de nosotros, porque estaba allí en el camerino, pero me apetecía presentar a Palahniuk, yo personalmente, más que nada porque es una operación absurda, porque todo el mundo que ha venido aquí sabe perfectamente quién es, por eso habéis venido. Pero bueno, hay ciertas cosas de su biografía, no las cosas más pintorescas, pero sí, digamos, los datos que me parecen interesantes para entender su carrera, que me gustaría mencionar. Palahniuk escribió su primera novela a final del siglo pasado, muy cerca del milenio, lo cual me parece muy significativo. En el 97 publicó, como todos sabéis, El Club de la Lucha, y desde entonces ha ido escribiendo una serie de novelas prácticamente año tras año. Es un autor extremadamente prolífico. Es un autor que, curiosamente, algo que me parece fascinante de su obra es que no me parece muy común que un autor que ha tenido un éxito tan enorme con su primer libro, en su caso el éxito se vio también magnificado por la famosa adaptación de su primera película, pero no me parece muy habitual que un autor que ha tenido este éxito como punto de partida de su carrera haya sobrevivido de esa manera a ese éxito. Me explico. Las estadísticas nos dicen, o lo más probable habría sido que Chuck Palahniuk habría sido siempre toda su vida el autor del Club de la Lucha. Y sin embargo no ha sido así. Es decir, libro tras libro, todos sus libros han creado una expectativa similar. Su carrera ha sido, en ese sentido, extremadamente regular. Prácticamente todos sus libros han sido superventas, sus novelas. Es un autor que, según yo he podido leer, ha vendido en el conjunto de su carrera entre 4 y 5 millones de libros, según donde uno lea. Y es un autor que yo creo que ha conseguido esto de distintas maneras. Por un lado, siendo extremadamente fiel a su estilo. Realmente hay pocos autores contemporáneos que yo pueda leer como Chuck Palahniuk, en los cuales ya no solamente una página de Chuck Palahniuk sea perfectamente reconocible, sino que prácticamente un párrafo o una línea de su obra lo es. En cierta manera, él cumple ese ideal que todos los escritores tienen, que es haber inventado su propio lenguaje literario. Por otro lado, otra de las claves de su éxito ha sido el hecho de haber creado, en cierta manera, un público para sus libros. Se ha hablado mucho del fenómeno de los fans en relación a la obra de Chuck Palahniuk. Él es realmente un autor con un público increíblemente leal, increíblemente entusiasta, y cuando hablo de entusiasmo, quizá en cierta manera trasciende el tipo de entusiasmo que uno espera de un lector, ¿no? Se ha dicho que muchos de sus lectores solamente son lectores de sus libros, no responden al perfil del típico lector literario, pero bueno, yo lo he visto en cierta manera, lo he vivido. Yo, por ejemplo, recuerdo haber estado hace unos años en Nueva York, hace 4 o 5 años, por ejemplo. Una tarde estaba yo cerca de Union Square, en Nueva York, y vi por casualidad que Chuck Palahniuk hacía una lectura, iba a estar leyendo un fragmento de una de sus novelas en la librería de Strand, que es una librería muy famosa de allí de Manhattan, y se me ocurrió simplemente pues, pasar a ver, y digo, bueno, voy a intentar ver si puedo colarme, ver un trozo, aunque haya empezado ya, porque me hace gracia, yo lo traduzco, etcétera. Con lo cual, bueno, evidentemente me encontré con llegar a la librería de Strand y la cola para ver a Chuck Palahniuk daba la vuelta 2 veces a la manzana, y había ya mucha gente que obviamente no iba a poder entrar, pero estaba todavía allí movida por la esperanza de tal vez poder entrar y ver a Chuck Palahniuk, ¿no? Y cuando evidentemente pregunté a alguien si había alguna posibilidad de entrar, me miraron con cara de decir, bueno, ¿quién es este extranjero idiota que está aquí pensando que puede entrar a ver a Chuck Palahniuk, ¿no? Por lo tanto, yo creo que esta es una de las grandes características de Palahniuk como autor. Evidentemente se ha hablado mucho también de un tipo de perfil de autor que a él, por ejemplo, yo he leído muchas veces como lo caracterizan como el tipo de escritor estrella de rock, en el sentido en que tiene una relación mucho más, digamos, cierto culto a la personalidad, si se quiere. También la temática de sus libros es una especie como de sátira macabra, muy cercana a la cultura contemporánea, muy cercana a la cultura de los medios, algo muy, en cierta manera, muy atractivo para un tipo de espectador contemporáneo. Evidentemente, la principal explicación de que a la gente le gusten sus libros son sus libros, no es que él sea una persona, sí lo es una persona extremadamente carismática en público, pero más allá de eso son los libros lo que explica lo que ha pasado, ¿no? Y bueno, respecto a mi persona y mi relación con él, aprovecho también para presentarme. Yo, he sido traductor literario ya, pues va para 15 años y traductor de su obra desde hace una docena. De hecho, he traducido prácticamente quizá 10 libros de él ya posiblemente. Empecé con su cuarta novela, recuerdo perfectamente la primera novela de Chuck Palahniuk que traduje, se llamaba Choke, Asfixia en español, y una novela que en su momento, cuando la leí sin conocer la obra del autor, me resultó extremadamente sorprendente. Es una novela, si no recuerdo mal, porque he traducido muchas, como digo, una novela acerca de un individuo que cuida a su madre y para cuidar a su madre recauda fondos fingiendo episodios de asfixia en restaurantes y trabajando como actor en un museo y haciendo muchas más cosas, porque como después ya podría averiguar, en las novelas de Chuck Palahniuk pasan muchísimas cosas, muchísimas, hasta el punto de que es casi imposible explicar realmente cuál es el argumento de cada una de ellas. Y como traductor de Chuck Palahniuk, una de las tareas que me ha tocado siempre ha sido lidiar con los fans españoles de Chuck Palahniuk. Los fans españoles de Chuck Palahniuk tienen un perfil parecido a los fans me imagino que del resto del mundo. Lo que pasa es que en el caso de España, como él no es una persona que normalmente venga a España, sus fans muchas veces acuden a mí, ¿no? Lo cual es una experiencia bastante curiosa. Y yo, por ejemplo, tengo contacto bastante regular con fans de Chuck Palahniuk por internet, por las redes sociales, también en la vida real. Vienen a mí en persona y me hacen toda clase de preguntas acerca de su obra, acerca de comentarios de todo tipo. De tipo, por ejemplo, ellos me preguntan, bueno, pero ¿cuándo va a salir la nueva novela de Chuck Palahniuk en español, ¿no? Lo cual es un equívoco, porque la gente piensa que un traductor sabe esto. Un traductor no sabe nada normalmente. Traduces la novela, no sabes cuándo va a ser publicada, no sabes nada. Hasta el punto, o del tipo, por ejemplo, hey, muchas gracias por traducir los libros de Chuck Palahniuk. Nuevamente desconociendo el hecho de que ser un traductor es una persona que trabaja para ganarse la vida y que lo hace por dinero y no como resultado de un impulso, filantrópico, ¿no? Pero bueno, es una presencia a la que me he acostumbrado. Vivo rodeado de esta gente y, como digo, no me importa que de vez en cuando me aborden en un bar. Y supongo que en ese sentido todos los traductores de Chuck Palahniuk y todo el mundo cumplimos una función de escudo para hacer que simplemente para esta gente no acabe poniéndose demasiado nerviosa, cogiendo un avión y yéndose a Portland, Oregón, a hablar con Chuck Palahniuk. Como digo, también una presencia ha sido continua en toda mi vida como traductor. Yo, por ejemplo, para mí, traducir la novela anual de Chuck Palahniuk se ha convertido en un ritual. Es algo como las vacaciones de verano, como pasar la Navidad con mis hijos, etc. Sé que siempre llegará a una época determinada del año esa novela que yo voy a traducir, ¿no? Y bueno, y es algo que realmente es probablemente mucho más familiar para mí ya de lo que él mismo pueda imaginar, ¿no? Me gustaría hacerle 1000 preguntas. Voy a hablar de sus libros. Voy a hablar de toda una serie de cuestiones que espero que os interesen. Podría empezar perfectamente, por ejemplo, por esta cuestión que acabo de mencionar, ¿no? Por ejemplo, la hiperproductividad de Chuck Palahniuk, uno de los rasgos más relevantes de su obra. Acerca de la hiperproductividad de Chuck he leído muchas declaraciones de él hablando de por qué le gusta tanto escribir y por qué le gusta escribir tanto, y tiene esta especie como... De hecho, yo le he oído, por ejemplo, viendo, por ejemplo, entrevistas a él y tal, referirse, por ejemplo, a su novela, la novela que ahora se publica en España, que es una novela que se llama Tell All, que es sobre la celebridad y la industria de Hollywood. Le he oído referirse, por ejemplo, a esta novela como mi novela de este año, y luego referirse a la anterior como mi novela del año pasado, lo cual ya implica un compromiso con la creación literaria envidiable, que cualquier otro, probablemente todos los demás escritores no la rascan, pero vamos, ni de lejos. Respecto a esa hiperproductividad, yo he leído 2 versiones que él ha dado en entrevistas. Una de ellas dice, y traduzco, me encanta escribir y siempre hay cosas espantosas y terribles en la vida de la gente que la gente no puede resolver, y son estas cosas las que yo tengo que convertir en ficción. Esta es una de las explicaciones que le ha dado de su hiperproductividad. La otra es que en Portland, Oregón, hace tanto frío y los inviernos son tan largos y grises que prácticamente lo único que puede hacer es escribir un libro cada invierno. Por lo tanto, ¿cuál de las dos versiones es cierta?
They can both be correct. It's both, too. It rains a lot and life is shitty. Can I say that?
Ok, de todas maneras entiendo que debe haber un tipo de presión prácticamente dolorosa para poder seguir el propio ritmo, ¿no? Para poder estar haciendo un libro cada año. O sea, no debe ser fácil. Es cierto que hay algunos años en que se ha saltado esta dinámica. Yo he estado haciendo sumas y no todos los años he escrito un libro, pero no es una gran carga, esto es una obligación contractual o es algo que tú te impones. ¿Cómo funciona esto?
It used to be, when people had a problem every week, that they would go to church. And church is where people go when they have problems that they can't solve. In the U.S., the civil rights movement started in churches because there was no way that black people could resolve their situation in oppression. So at least they could find the comfort of being in a church. So they would go to church, and subsequently they met other black people who felt the same horrible problems. And in church they found a way of being together, and they realized they weren't alone, and the civil rights movement was born. And so in a way, writing is an act of resignation. I write because there's a problem I can't solve. And no matter where you are in your life, there is a problem that you can't solve. And I go to a writer's workshop that meets once a week. We now meet Monday nights. And it's mostly people who have problems they can't solve. So they're all writing a story that is a way of disguising the problem they can't solve. And so in a way, writing has become my church. And it's a part of my life, and it's how I deal with my problems. So as long as I have problems, I will write every day, every week, probably a book a year.
Sin embargo, digamos, la escritura es decir, no termina en este acto terapéutico. La escritura, la literatura es algo que trasciende esta parte bonita, ¿no? de la escritura. Yo, por ejemplo, tiemblo de pensar que cada año escribes un libro, pero cada año tienes que hacer una gira gigantesca para promocionar ese libro. Eso sí que debe ser una pesadilla, porque además las giras que tú haces no son ninguna broma. Probablemente, bueno, más allá del hecho de que probablemente viajes por toda América, pero un escritor americano también es un escritor global hoy en día, por lo tanto debes estar por todo el mundo todo el tiempo hablando de este acto tan íntimo de terapia.
And we have all had jobs that we hated. And the trick is, can you fool yourself into loving the part of the job that you hate? And when I worked on the assembly line, I worked as a mechanic for 13 years after college. I got a degree in journalism, just like Bill, who was sitting here. But I couldn't find a job. So I became a mechanic building trucks for 13 years. And there was always some way to make that job fun. It's so wonderful. I would take a small stuffed rat that was very realistic and put it inside the truck in some part of the truck where you would have to reach blindly. And the next person who had to reach in there to fix that part of the truck would find my rat. And it was things like that that made that job a lot of fun. And it wasn't just fun for me. It was fun for everyone. When you find a way to make your job fun, it affects everyone you work with. And you give them a way to be with this terrible situation. And now the terrible part of my job is touring. And about the second or the third time I had to do a big tour of 25, 30 cities, I realized that I was going out there and I was hating every second of it. And the people that I was talking to had never been to hear an author read. And the first time that they were hearing an author present, they were seeing an author who was hating what he was doing. So I had to find some way to trick myself into having a great time. So I started shipping prizes to the events. And for years, people would ask me, will you sign my arm? Will you autograph my arm or my leg? And I would sign my name. And a year later, I would come back on tour, and they would pull up their sleeve, and they would show me my name tattooed on their arm. And that seemed so wrong. So I thought that I would get a bunch of artificial severed arms that are used in movies. They have blood and a bone sticking out of one end. They're a severed arm from the elbow down with a hand. And I got hundreds and hundreds of them. And I shipped them to all the bookstores where I would appear the next year. And it worked great. At the end of the event, I could throw these arms out, and people would fight for them. And it would be wonderful. It was like feeding lions in the zoo. And if they wanted an autograph on their arm, I could autograph their fake arm. And I got through half the country. But about in the middle of the United States, I got to Denver, Colorado. And the bookstore people said, Mr. Palahniuk, you'll be very happy to know that your severed arms have arrived. But unfortunately, we thought that they were for Aaron Ralston, the man who was reading a book here yesterday. There was a famous book that year called Between a Rock and a Hard Place. And it was subsequently made into a movie by David Fincher, who made Fight Club. And the movie was called 48 Hours. And Between a Rock and a Hard Place is the story of Aaron Ralston. It's a true story of how he was hiking in the desert, and he fell down, and he got his arm caught between two boulders in the middle of nowhere. And he had to use his pocket knife to hack his arm off and then hike out before he bled to death. And when 35 different bookstores got my cases full of bloody severed arms, they opened them by accident, and they thought, these must be for Aaron's event. And this is the most distasteful promotion we have ever seen for a book. And I had no idea that Aaron Ralston was touring before me. And in 35 different cities, poor Aaron Ralston was brought cases of bloody severed arms. And he had to say, these are for Chuck Palahniuk's event tomorrow night. So the arms, the extreme nature of the stories, everything that I try to do, I'm doing just to make this part of the job fun for myself. Because this is my life. This is part of my life. I'm not going to throw it away. I want this part of my life to be as much fun as the writing part of my life, or as the going out to parties part of my life. That if I can make this part of my life fun, I'll keep doing it. And that's one reason why I can do a book a year, is because I fool myself into having a great time no matter what part I have to do.
Bueno, a mí me parece muy admirable esta estrategia de convencerse a sí mismo, digamos, de persuadirse a sí mismo para disfrutar. De todas maneras, tengo que confesar que estoy completamente fascinado habiendo visto vídeos de eventos promocionales de Chuck Palahniuk en América en los cuales, bueno, evidentemente es cierto que hay un componente de espectáculo que el público debe adorar. En los eventos promocionales de la gira de Palahniuk hay concursos, se reparten juguetes. Chuck hace el esfuerzo, cada gira escribe un relato inédito especial para esa gira y lo lee para sus lectores, para que tengan un material que no tiene el resto de los lectores que no han acudido al evento. Incluso he leído en alguna entrevista, no sé si es cierto o no, que Chuck ha llegado a hacer envíos por correo de regalos personalizados para sus lectores. Por tanto, es decir, me parece muy interesante como alternativa a una promoción convencional, pero también ciertamente, o sea, es decir, estás haciendo un poco más de lo necesario, estás siendo casi demasiado amable con tus lectores, en cierta manera. Parece más esfuerzo del que podrías hacer. Admirable, por otra parte.
Of course I'm overdoing it. I mean, if you have the choice, are you going to, when you reach the end of your life, when you're on your deathbed, are you going to go, I overdid that. No, I should have held back. I should have done less. Or are you going to say, fuck, I wish I'd done more. Oh, I wish I'd done everything stupid that came into my mind. I wish I had done so much more. And I know that there's going to be a point where I'm on my deathbed. And I won't be thinking, boy, I wish I hadn't sent a huge box of candy and really made somebody happy. Or I wish I hadn't done this one particularly stupid thing that made somebody really happy. Because that makes me happy. I loved one year, I went to England, and the only thing I could get through customs were these hundreds and hundreds of bacon-scented air fresheners you would hang in your car. And it would make your whole car smell like cooking bacon. And they opened them at the airport, hundreds of fake bacons. And because I'm an American, they just sent me through. That's the secret. If you're an American, you can take anything, anywhere. And I gave them all out during an event about this size. And people opened them, and English people, who knows, they rubbed them all over themselves. And the whole crowd smelled like cooking ham. And people laughed and giggled about it, and it was so much fun. And then I read a story that's based on true stories about how people die if they accidentally fall through the snow into natural hot springs, and they cook to death very quickly. And they die screaming. And people who witness these scenes say that what's most distinctive is that the person is screaming and that the scene smells like cooking bacon. And as soon as I read the story and people realized that they'd coated themselves, it wasn't funny anymore, except for me. And that's why I love my job.
Hablemos, si te parece, de los libros en sí. Tú has hablado de tus novelas en unos términos que a mí me parecen fascinantes. Has dicho que muchas de tus novelas tratan acerca de la aventura del individuo por abandonar su aislamiento, integrarse en una comunidad. Has llegado incluso a describir en términos realmente tiernos algunas de tus novelas más escandalosas, como por ejemplo, yo recuerdo una entrevista que leí en que decías que Pick Me era la historia, en el fondo, una representación del itinerario del adolescente por aceptar a su familia, etc. Lo cual, en cierta manera, habiendo leído y habiendo traducido tus libros, me parece completamente coherente. Y, sin embargo, hay algo que yo creo que es lo que ha llegado al gran público, que es esta cuestión lo macabro, esta especie de, como de manera en que tus novelas, una a una, han ido eligiendo todos estos temas quizá feos o reprimidos por la sociedad, ¿no? Y los has utilizado como para crear una especie de nuevo género gótico con estas cosas reprimidas, ¿no? Esta especie como de cosa freudiana, ¿no? Por ejemplo, no sé, has hablado de la obsesión por el sexo con muchos de tus libros, has hablado del cáncer, has hablado del miedo al terrorismo, has hablado de los problemas de la autoimagen, has hablado de toda una serie de elementos que dan miedo, en cierta manera. Y creo que hay mucha gente que siente una fascinación por esta parte de tu obra, ¿no? No sé qué impresión te produce esto. ¿Crees que hay algún tipo de distancia entre la forma en que tú ves tus libros y la mayoría de lectores los vemos? ¿Es algo que te interesa? ¿Es algo que te preocupa? ¿O simplemente crees que todo es perfectamente compatible?
Thank you for that. When I was little, I wanted to be a priest. I did. Because I love the idea that your job would be to hear the things that no one could tell anyone else. That they couldn't tell anyone, but that they would come and tell those things to you. And you'd get paid for it. That would be a great job. And so I got a degree in journalism, thinking it would be sort of that, but it's not. They only tell you what they want you to hear, and you don't get paid very much. But I still collected stories, and in a way you don't have the option of not collecting a certain kind of story. May I tell you one of those stories? Something that is so terrible that you won't be able to forget it. A friend of mine who is not in the room, who went backstage, after college, he couldn't get a job, so he worked for an airline, handling baggage. They called them throwers, where you take the luggage as it comes down from the ticketing area, and you take the bag with the luggage tag and you throw it onto whatever flight it's supposed to go on. It comes down a conveyor belt, comes down very fast, suitcase after suitcase, and you have to grab it and throw it and grab it and throw it, and you go to college for 5 years and you have enormous debts, and that's your job. Grab the bag, throw the bag, grab the bag, throw the bag. And it's filthy. And that conveyor belt is so worn, the big holes have started to wear in this rubber and canvas belt that is going by so fast that it blurs. And you have to wear these heavy canvas gloves because as you grab the bag and throw the bag, grab the bag, throw the bag, the translator is going to hate translating that. There's always the chance that your finger is going to slip through one of these holes in the canvas belt, and the belt will rip your finger right off. And this friend is so miserable doing this monkey's job with all his student loan debt and no future that he reads the union rules. And the union rules say that if you lose a finger, if your finger is ripped off, you get $25,000. That's a settlement for a finger. So he decides that he's not going to wear the gloves anymore. $25,000. He could go back to college. He could travel. He could buy a new car. $25,000. So he doesn't wear the gloves. It's the middle of the night at the Seattle airport. He's grabbing the bag, throwing the bag, grabbing the bag, throwing the bag, grabbing the bag. He feels just a jerk on his hand. And he looks up, and his middle finger is gone from the knuckle. There's no finger. And part of him thinks, hooray, I am saved. I don't have to do this terrible job anymore. It's worth it. I lost my finger, but I earned the rest of my life. And then he turns his hand around, and he sees that the finger is still hanging down the back. And it's been ripped off except for that white, thready ligament, that leathery thing inside that makes it move. And blood is pouring out of it. And the blood is going on the bags. And if he doesn't grab these bags, they go back up to ticketing. And so his blood is going all over this luggage, these suitcases. And if he doesn't do something fast, the people in ticketing will see all this bloody baggage, and someone will run down to save him. So he realizes he's got to take the finger and pull it all the way off. He's just got to pull it off and throw it into the machine so it will be a lost finger. Otherwise, it doesn't count. So he takes this finger, and he pulls it, and he pulls it, and that little white tendon stretches like crazy, and he's pulling it, and he's pulling it. He can feel it all the way up in his shoulder. And he's... And before he can rip it all the way off, security rushes down and catches him. And they take him to the hospital, and they fix his finger. It kind of works. And he gets nothing. He gets fired for not wearing his gloves. And that's a story that the hostess will always hate you for telling before the dinner party. But that's a story, the kind of story that you find yourself telling for the rest of your life, because that's the only way that you have of processing, of dealing with it. And so people tell me these stories that are true stories. And the only way I have for, in a way, forgetting these stories, tolerating these stories, is to turn them into something and to tell them over and over until I wear them out. In a way, I think that's why we tell stories, because we're digesting them. And there are some stories that take forever to digest and to assimilate. And so, even though I had a terrible job, I was still hearing these stories. And they're stories that stay with me for 10 years or 30 years. If you've heard the story Guts, the Guts story that even last year in Miami, 2 people fainted when I read that story. I heard the candle part of that story, what happened to the man with a candle. I heard that in college when I was 19. And that story stayed with me for 30 years until I finally wrote it into something. So, in a way, I don't think I have a choice. You know, this is my only way of dealing with these extreme stories that people tell me. And in a way, I've become that priest I always wanted to be, because I'm a safe person. People perceive me that I'm going to hear their story. I'm not going to judge them or to shut down or to recoil in horror. I'm going to kind of appreciate the absurd wonderfulness of their story. And that they themselves really need to tell that story. So, probably for the rest of your life, you'll be telling that. And he pulled it, and he pulled it. So. I've got 1,000 stories like that.
Bien, es otra de las cuestiones que a mí me interesaba, perdón, tratar esta imagen que muchos tenemos de ti como una persona que, en tus propias palabras, se dedica a recoger historias ajenas, digamos, a construir tus ficciones a partir de la no ficción, en el sentido de que lo que para la mayoría de novelistas posiblemente es un engorro, que es el tener que investigar para escribir sus libros, tú has dicho muchas veces que es realmente la parte central prácticamente de tu proceso compositivo, ¿no? Y también tengo la sensación, por lo que he leído, aunque no estoy seguro, de que tú también, por esta misma razón, eres más un lector de no ficción que un lector de ficciones. Eres una persona que está más interesada por la realidad y cómo transformarla, ¿no? Te quería preguntar también si tal vez es esto lo que tú tenías en mente cuando diseñaste el título de esta charla, que era contar pequeñas mentiras para descubrir una mayor verdad, ¿no? Si tal vez el componente de ficción o el componente de mentira para ti es el vehículo para contar algo que es una verdad más grande que no podemos contar de otra manera.
I love going to parties. When you go to parties, you're going to hear stories, you're going to be entertained by things that haven't been through the 10,000 boring committee meetings of Hollywood or network television, where every idea has been so worked and reworked that it's completely bloodless. I was at a party a while back, and maybe half of my friends are teachers, so that they're all performers, because teachers and lawyers are really performers. They love to be in front of people and to tell stories. And they were telling how in our local school system there was a new announcement, a new public announcement that they would make overhead. And they would say, recess will be held in the library. Recess, that's like playtime, will be held in the library. And when you hear that, you have to make all of your students' life face down on the ground. You have to lock the classroom door. You have to shut off the lights. You have to pull the blinds. And you all have to lie on the floor face down silently in the dark until they announce the lunch special is tuna noodle casserole. Because recess will be held in the library is the coded announcement that a school shooter is in the hallways killing people. They can't say that. And the all clear, the lunch special is tuna noodle casserole, means the school shooter has been killed. It's safe to come out. And so I love the nature of things that we can't say out loud, things that have to be coded, because they hold so much power. They're so frightening. And death is one of those things. A lot of my friends were in the military. And when you train as a paratrooper, jumping out of airplanes for whatever reason, for the first, I think it's 90 days, 3 months of your training, you have to carry a cherry pie. What is Spanish for pie?
Tarta.
Tarta? Mm-hmm. And cherry?
Cereza. Tarta de cereza.
You know, it's full of red, chunky goop, just like you.
No, but we don't have that here.
So you have to carry this fragile pastry crust full of runny, red, chunky cherries. And you have to care for it like a baby. Because it represents you. If you mess up any one thing in your parachute training, you're going to be this smashed, crushed, runny red thing that is disgusting. And so for 90 days, you externalize the danger that you're in by taking care of this little cherry pie. And after 90 days, when you graduate, you symbolically go on stage and you eat this little pie in front of everyone. And it's your way of being with the fact that you're jumping out of planes all the time and that you're not very good at it and that you could end up smashed on the ground any time. Another friend of mine, Paul may even know her, a thriller writer who writes mysteries and thrillers named Chelsea Kane. Good friend. When Chelsea was 8 years old, she was on vacation, visiting her father, and she spent weeks looking for the perfect gift, the perfect souvenir to take home to her mother. And one day she found this little coconut-scented candle. It's a little candle that smelled like coconut with crushed wax on the outside that looked like coconut. And she was so happy that she wasn't thinking very well. She was in such a hurry to get this little candle back to her father's house that she decided to take a shortcut through this enormous cemetery. And this is in Key West, Florida. And the cemetery it's huge, like a jungle. And no one ever goes into it. It's these huge palm trees and vines, a wilderness. And little 8-year-old Chelsea Kane, with her little candle, is about halfway through this miles of empty cemetery when a man steps out from behind a tombstone. Little blonde, pretty Chelsea Kane, and says, "Hey, I want to talk to you. Hold up. I just want to talk." And Chelsea realizes on some level, I'm dead. I'm a dead person. And she keeps walking, and this man falls into step behind her and says, "No, hold up. No, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to hurt you. I promise. I just want to talk to you, little girl. Just hold up. I just want to talk to you. I'm not going to hurt you. You're not in any danger." And Chelsea's walking faster and faster, and it's loose sand. It's like beach sand. And she's thinking, all she can think is, he's going to hurt my candle. He's going to take my candle, and he's going to hurt my candle. And she starts running. And all she can think is, if I can save this candle, everything will be okay. And this man is chasing her through this cemetery. And she's lost. And she is driving through all of this wilderness, holding this candle, thinking, I've just got to save this candle. And she finds a hole in the cemetery fence, and she gets through the hole just as this man is about to grab her. And now she writes books about women who are in danger from killers. But I love looking for the pattern of how people externalize that fantastic danger. Again, that thing that we cannot be with directly. We can't be with the fact, hey, there's a school shooter in the hallway right now, and you all are dead. So the coded ways that we have of announcing the things and discussing the things that we can't discuss directly, I find those absolutely fascinating. So all of my books are generally about death and romance, because they're things that you can't talk about directly without kind of destroying the magic of them.
Lamentablemente he recibido la advertencia bastante clara por parte de la organización de que mi parte en todo esto tenía que terminar a las 9:30, son las 9:30 y ahora creo que es el momento de dar paso a los lectores, a los espectadores, perdón, para que puedan dialogar directamente con él y plantearles sus preguntas o comentarios.
Buenas tardes. ¿Querría decirnos qué es lo que tiene en el libro negro? ¿Qué consulta en su libro?
The black book is, because my hands shake so bad when I do things like this, and it helps to have something to hold. So it's my teddy bear. Do you have teddy bears in Spain? Oh. It's full of a lot of little notes to remind me of very small stories that illustrate what I'd like to talk about. There's one note in here that says glasses. And I didn't start wearing glasses until I was about 10 years old. Eyeglasses, spectacles. And for the first years I was in school, I was so angry that the people who put the clock on the wall put it so high. What was the point of putting a clock that high? No one could ever see it. And basketball was a lunatic's game. It was people throwing a ball at something impossible to see. It was so far away. And when I was 10 years old, I got glasses. And the whole world suddenly made sense. You're not all out there to make me look like an idiot. It's actually a great world. And so in a way, so often, I really want to be proved wrong. I want to be dazzled and amazed by how things really are. That I think most of us, I know that I live kind of in a fog, that the world is out to get me in some way. Forgive me, I'm going to tell another small story. It says Eiffel Tower in here. When I was in Paris for the first time, I went to a dinner party at my editor's house. And they all spoke French. I don't speak anything but a tiny bit of German. And they all smoked cigarettes. And I was exhausted. I was so tired. And I sat there with all the cigarette smoke and all the people speaking French. And all I could think was that I had to get up early the next morning and work all day long. And I just wanted to sleep. And people were arguing, they were fighting in French. And finally, someone got up to leave, a couple. And I knew they were heroin addicts because they'd gone in the bathroom and shot up. And I knew that they were high, but I begged them to take me back to my hotel. I was so tired. And we got in their car, and we started driving through Paris. And they were so high that they were driving at maybe 2 kilometers an hour. And we would get to red lights, and they would stop. And the light would turn green, and they would stay stopped. And the light would turn red, and it would turn green again, and they would stay stopped. And I had no idea where we were. I was so lost and confused, and I was so angry that these damn French people were going to ruin my life, that they hated me. I was just furious. And finally, they started driving very fast, and they were driving through the red lights. And they were going the wrong way around corners and down streets. And finally, they pulled up underneath the Eiffel Tower, onto the curb, onto the sidewalk. And they parked on the sidewalk. And there were police right there. And the police started to come over, and these people jumped out of their car. And they left the door open, they left the engine running, and they screamed, "Chuck, you've got to run. Run, Chuck, run." And now I am really hating them. And so I chased them across the plaza under the Eiffel Tower in the middle of the night, and they're still screaming, "Run!" And now the police are chasing us. And they get to the very center, underneath the very center of the Eiffel Tower, where the four legs come together, and they stop. And they yell, "Chuck, look up. Look up at the sky. Look up." And I'm so angry that I stop with them. I'm just soaked in sweat and just rigid with anger. And I look up. And at that point where the four legs come together, it forms like a huge tunnel of light. It's just amazing, this tunnel of brightness that goes straight up, farther than you can see, to this point of kind of darkness. And I look up with my head craned back at that moment, and the police arriving, and the entire world vanishes. Everything goes to nothing. Absolute oblivion. Complete silence, complete pitch darkness. And all I can hear is this huge intake of breath, like a huge gasp. And I'm so disoriented, falling into this complete darkness, that I lose my balance. My knees kind of buckle in. I find myself falling down and kind of just clutching the only thing I can be aware of, which is this cold, filthy pavement. If you've ever been underneath the Eiffel Tower, it's nothing but dog poop and chewing gum. And that's what I'm holding on to. And then everyone starts to cheer. And this whole evening that I have spent thinking that everyone hated me and that they were all out to humiliate me, everyone at that French dinner party was smoking cigarettes and arguing among themselves about the one thing that I had to do while I was in Paris. What was the one thing they had to show me? And they decided that the one thing was that I needed to be underneath the Eiffel Tower at the stroke of midnight when they shut off all the lights, because it is such a spectacular moment when everything goes to nothing. And they had planned the whole night to pretend that they were high. And they had stayed stopped at those red lights so that they were watching their watch so that we would arrive underneath the Eiffel Tower. And I would be out of breath and I would be running. And they had engineered every instant of that whole evening to bring me to that spot of such fantastic beauty. And then when the lights went out, everyone gasps because it's so emotionally moving, so overwhelming. And I want to think that all of life is like that. And that someday when all the lights do go out and there's one last big gasp, that it's going to be just like that. That it wasn't all to humiliate me, to just cause me trouble. That it was actually a huge conspiracy to bring me to a joy that is greater than anything I could have conceptualized for myself. I hope that answered your question. That's what's in my book.
Hola. Hola. A ver, yo soy súper fan del proyecto Mayhem, o sea, muy fan. Tengo unos amigos que quieren ponerlo en práctica y todo, pero ellos siempre me dicen, tú no puedes. O sea, yo no puedo, ¿por qué? Dice, no, porque tú tienes tetas, pero no, los coños no entran en el proyecto Mayhem, solo entra testosterona y algo de tetas. Entonces yo digo, bueno, este hombre no metió a hombres aquí en este proyecto porque era algo machista, pero luego hay otros libros, como por ejemplo en Nana, que Helen es una mujer muy poderosa, que tan poderosa que acaba siendo un hombre al final casi. Entonces quería saber un poco por la razón por la que en el proyecto Mayhem no entran coños, ¿no?
When I read the Gut story, which is about 3 little boys all being crippled with hideous experiments, a woman came up, very angry, a young woman, and she said, I feel discriminated against that you did not pull the bowels out of a girl. You know, I'm just not really comfortable hurting women. I wish I had the gift that I could just hurt women. But I feel myself really pulling back with female characters, that I can do pretty much anything to a male character. But there is a kind of chauvinistic part of me that does not feel comfortable depicting women, even in a consensual situation, but depicting women being, brutalized. And so, I'm sorry, I can beat the crap out of a guy on the page. I can pull his bowels out, anything. But I just can't do that to a female character. That's, yeah. So, I'm a pig.
Hola. En Asfixia dices que tener hijos es el opio del pueblo. ¿Podrías explicarlo un poco, por favor?
I didn't say that. I think a character said that. And I think there is very little that, in writing fiction, there's very little that is more fun than writing a character that says things that you maybe or maybe don't agree with, but are still very strong things. So it was a blast to write Tyler Durden and have Tyler Durden stand up there and say kind of bombastic, over-the-top things. So Victor, I'm sure that Victor said that in Choke, that having children is the opiate of the masses. Because for Victor, at a stage in his life, he can justify that. That says more about Victor than it does about the world. So Victor said it. It's character development. It makes people happy. Who am I to say? So that's my fallback.
Hello, I'm going to say this in English. I'm going to say I'm a big fan of your work and thank you for coming tonight. I want to say for me, when I read your stories, I recognize something that there's truth in it, and you've been telling us lots of great stories tonight that are true. But at the same time, I say that can't be true. So I want to know, how do we catalog your work? Is it fact or is it fiction? Can you maybe explain that a little bit?
I think I'm not sure if I would say anthropology or sociology, because that tends to be what I read. I'm always looking for a kind of ritualized human behavior. Among my friends, if you're eating dinner with my friends and you get food on your face, you have, say, a little food right here, someone in the crowd will say, "What's your name? What's your name?" Natasha. They'll say, "Natasha, you've got an antelope out of the park?" And it's sweet because it's a kind of face-saving way of talking about what might not be dignified to talk about. But it also reinforces an in-group language that we've created for ourselves and that we've held just among ourselves for 30 years since college. And so when you say, "Natasha, you've got an antelope out of the park," we're all 22 years old again. And that feels good. And nobody knows what we're talking about, and that feels good. And it's those little anthropological behaviors that I'm always looking for. When you go to a party and someone tells a story, you can tell the best stories, you can identify the best stories, not because they make people laugh and leave them in silence, but because they make people laugh and they elicit everyone present to lean forward and say, oh, that happened to me. I've got a story just like that. I went to a party once and I told about the first day I had worked on the assembly line at Freightliner. My foreman, the man I worked directly for, sent me around the factory to get a squeegee sharpener. And here I am, 22 years old. I've never worked in a big factory. I go up to all these huge, rough, tough, filthy guys, and I say, do you have our squeegee sharpener? And every one of these people swears at me and spits on me and curses me and sends me to another person who repeats the process. And by the end of the day, the only thing I have learned is that there is no such thing as a squeegee sharpener. But I know the entire layout of the plant, and I've basically introduced myself to every foreman that I might someday work for. And when I told that story, to this day, people will come up and say, I worked in a brick factory, and on my first day, my foreman told me to get a bucket of steam. And every day after that, you can always tell the new hire, because he's the guy running around with burnt hands trying to hold a bucket upside down to get steam from here to there. And another friend who said, I'm a pediatric surgeon. And on your first rotation, when you've been on duty for 36 hours, they wait until you have slept. You lay down to sleep for about 10 minutes. And you've eaten nothing but sugar out of the candy machine for 36 hours, and you haven't slept. And as soon as you lie down in the middle of the night, they announce your name. Dr. So-and-so to room such and such, stat. Dr. So-and-so to room such and such, stat. In the middle of the night, you go running through this huge teaching hospital until you get to this wing that is not used very often. It's an old part of the building. But you don't think about that because as the elevator doors open, you hear screaming. You hear a woman screaming. And you charge down the hallway, and you throw the door of the room open, and there is a naked woman in bed, and she is covered in blood. And the room is almost entirely dark. There's just a few lights placed really low near the floor. And there are a lot of screens and curtains pulled in the room. And you don't think about that either, because as you open the door, this screaming naked woman throws something covered with blood that hits you, and you catch it reflexively. And it's a dead baby. And this woman is screaming, "You killed it, you fucker. You killed it, you son of a bitch. You killed my baby." And you haven't slept in 36 hours. And you're full of sugar and adrenaline. And they're still saying, "Dr. So-and-so to room such and such, stat." And now you're holding a dead baby covered in blood. And the reason why the room is so draped and so dark is that every doctor on staff is hiding in that room. And the woman in bed is a nurse or another doctor. And the reason why the blood is so realistic is that it's outdated, expired donor blood. And the baby is so perfectly a baby because it's one of those little resuscitation babies that you practice breathing on. And everyone is in that room because this has been done to them. And they now want to see it done to you. I'll skip ahead to the very best one. Again, in Paris. I was in Paris. And I was at a party, and I told some of these stories, and a man came by, and he gave me his business card, and he said, "I'm a doctor of veterinary science, and it takes forever to get trained in the academy. I had to apply for 7 years just to get into the academy to become a veterinarian, an animal doctor. And when I finally got in, they threw me a party. And they held the party in one of the big dissection labs late at night. And they gave me wine to drink. And I drank, and I drank, and they toasted me, and they said, welcome to the program. They said, congratulations. They said, you're one of us now. And they must have put something in my wine because I passed out. And he says they do this to everyone who's a new student in the program. When you pass out, they take off all of your clothes and they bunch you up like a fetus. They sort of bunch you up in a small little package. And then they bring in a large dead horse. And they slit its belly, and they put you inside the horse. And they sew it shut. And then they continue the party around the horse. And this man, he says, when you start to wake up, you don't have a clue where you are at. It's cold. It's so cold. And it's so dark. And you can't really move. And you want to throw up because the drug that they've given you makes you so sick. And you're shaking and you're blind, but you can hear them. You can hear them around you in the darkness. And as soon as you move, just the smallest move, they see you move inside the horse. And they all start to berate you. They're all cursing you, saying, you think it's so easy to be a French veterinarian. You think you can just pass some tests and maybe pay some money and wait in line, and we're going to make you a doctor. It's not. It's not easy. This is a really miserable job. And you have to be a tough person to do this job. And you are going to have to fight to be in this program. Just to be a student, you're going to have to fight. We're going to have to see you fight if you want to be a veterinarian. So he says you start to push against this sticky, stinking, it stinks, darkness. And eventually you burst a hand out through the skin of this dead horse. And as soon as you get a hand out into the light, you feel them put a glass of wine in your hand. And you have to kind of birth yourself from this huge dead thing. And you're naked. And you're covered with this dead blood. And the party continues. And they all cheer you. And they say, now you can be one of us. And what I love about these stories is that they're presenting an idea that is worse than the worst day you will ever have on that job. No matter how bad your day is, no matter how many little doggies or kitties die, it is never going to be as bad as waking up inside the dead horse. And all of your peers have that same experience. Well, at least we're not inside a dead horse. And so that's really what I do for a living, is I look for patterns. And I look for the purpose that they serve in people's lives. And the books that I make out of them are almost beyond the point, because it's so much joy, it's so much fun to be with people, and to find out that your experience is so similar to my experience, and that we all live such similar lives. I think that's just enormously moving. So, thank you.
Tenemos 3 minutos para una última pregunta breve y una respuesta posiblemente breve. 3 minutos.
Gus Van Sant y tú compartís Portland como ciudad habitual, me pregunto, ¿es muy mortífera Portland?
Portland is boring to death, you know. And there's a football game to hear about, so we're now done, okay? Let's find out about the football game. Thank you very much.
Somos materias infinitas.